That's pretty comfortable. Yeah, I don't, you heard from, I know Ken's not gonna be here,
Ken's the only one that I know is not coming.
so we don't know about John or Bill. Just on those 2 pages?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would lean this way more. Yeah.
Just kidding.
You are like banished over the
I
other
don't
side.
sit over there all by myself. My stepbrother and sister don't invite me over.
I think for the next meeting, you should just come in and camp out here
Oh,
and just
they
put like.
Here's what they would do.
over there.
They both go over there. They're
They'd
been
all do it.
delivered about making me be by
It
myself.
would be
over
2
there.
and 2. We would have balance there, right?
Is that what you think it was? I assumed that Bill just didn't want to sit next to me anymore, and that's why they moved us around.
Oh, we were just talking
we
about
were
me always
joking
sitting by myself.
That
these
Liz
two-
and Michael
Instead of
sit
your
here,
other-
and
your
then Chad
cohorts.
is over there. We were just
Gotcha.
joking that, he said, I got to get on the good side of the table over here with us,
No, this side, behind, not this side, not this side. I'm still known as the stepbrother of the 3. Because they've been here together longer.
All right. Ready to get started? Okay. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of the board to discuss the ultimate adoption of the policies through the Troon Law Firm. This will be the first of 3 meetings that we have planned through our Committee of the Whole process for that purpose. And so we'll get started. Would everyone rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, do a quick roll call here. Ms. Reed?
Here.
Ms. Mitchell? Here. Dr. Krebs?
Here.
Mr. Myers here. That takes us to a call to the public. Is there anyone here this evening that would like to address the board during the call to the public? Seeing none, that closes the call to the public and moves us into our agenda and the purpose for which we're here this evening, the initial review of the Troon policies. So,
Do we need to approve an agenda,
pardon
or
me?
do we need to approve an agenda for a committee? No.
Yeah. Or I'll just.
It's a work session.
Okay, it's a
Yeah,
work session,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Mr. Scaling?
Yes, so as we begin the process of adopting the Troon board policy package, there are a number of the policies in their package that require the selection of optional language in order to complete the policy. That's what I've shared in that Google folder that I've shared. The whole package, just the policies that have, and then optional policies as well. So we would be going through today, starting with the 100s, 200s, and 5,000, 1,000s, 2,000s, 5,000s. So going through and selecting the optional language based on the Troon policies. So if we want to get started, the first, the 1,000s, there's really not in the optional language. That just is a checklist there to remind us.
Can I just go, can you just, the process to get this, just that you, Chad, work with the attorneys?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Maybe just real briefly, like, how did you get this document?
Yeah.
Just because there's a ton of work that went into
So,
it.
yeah, Troon provided a little bit of a checklist. Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Yeah.
A little bit of a checklist here, but they also provided 2 adoption meetings. And so they went over all of the optional selections in their adoption meetings. They did it the same format that we are. They did the 1s, 2s, and 5s because there's some connections between those groups. And then they did the 3s and 4s in a separate meeting, and they just walked through this part of the optional selection for the adoption process. So I sat through those meetings. I took these policies. I met with anyone that might be connected to these policies to review the language and their current practices. Met with Mr. Engelder, Dr. Mosier, principals, the athletic director, anyone there that would understand how these policies work with their current practice, got their feedback, and that actually is what's generated the recommendations on that sheet that's provided, either based on our current practice or our current policy language as close to as possible. So based on that, the optional language there, those recommendations only are my recommendation based on meeting with all those individuals, reviewing our policies and reviewing our practices that are currently in place.
So starting at the top of the house, I know we made a decision to move to Troon because that's typically who we go to for legal advice about how to apply our policies and how to comply with various aspects of the law. So I expect that this is going to have a slightly different take than what Neola was presenting to us previously and what we had adopted previously. Is there a change in the overall approach to policy as far as the role of policy in the governance of the district versus what we had before with Neola? Are there any other significant structural changes in how the policies are laid out that we need to be aware of as we're going through everything?
If I understand the question as far as the governance, no, the policies would still have the same impact and the same priority that determine the district practices and procedures based on those policies. No. Is the overall package structured differently? Yeah, there's some structural differences. For example, they don't have a section that talks about each, support staff, teaching staff, students, like Neola does. All of those policies are referenced in the single policy instead of having it 3 different policies throughout. So there are some structural changes, but nothing which should change in the governance of that. Some wording, some minor differences throughout, but overall, no. Shouldn't change the way we function with respect to the policies dictating our practices and procedures in the district.
Now, I know with the Neola policies, that district tended to take the approach that we wanted to have clear guidelines written out in policy and certainly address any legal requirements that we were required to address through policy. But we wanted to take a more minimal approach to policy so that we had room to maneuver in administrative guidelines and other procedure level documents to get into the nitty gritty of exactly how we accomplish everything. Is that still the approach that we're taking?
It should be, absolutely, yes. These policies are written in a way that covers the basics of what we need to either, communicate or how we function, but then the details of how that functions certainly can be more dictated through administrative regulations or guidelines.
Okay. And I know we're going to go through the places where there are choices that we need to make in more detail before we, have to review the entire package and adopt that as a board. But as you were going through it through your review process with the internal stakeholders, did you find any places where we had policy in Neola and we do not have policy coming from Troon to cover the same subject?
No, not that way. There are some things that Troon, optional policies that Troon has provided that we currently didn't have, but I didn't see nothing, certainly stood out of adopting these policies isn't anything that we haven't already been doing, if I understood the question correctly. Yes.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I don't believe anything's missing.
Okay.
Really quick, I have a question about the process now. So tonight, we're going to go through these and we're going to direct administration, like which option that we want. And then at the next meeting, we'll be adopting those policies with the full board. Is that how the process is going to work, or?
Yes, I mean, it could work in various ways. The first step in this process is, yes, to select the optional language that the board wants in these policies. And then we will have a complete policy package ready to go. And if that wants to be, adopted as a whole policy package, if there wants to be, review of each section of those policies, those would be things that you all would need to decide. But the step would be language, adopt it, and then my recommendation would be any optional policies that are here, that we don't need for our current practices to be addressed at a time, after we've got our policy package in place and we're functioning. We can always add those policies later at a later date.
Are we gonna do this piecemeal type thing? Or, like, once we go through, let's say the ones and the twos, and we get those finished, we can adapt those at the next meeting, or no?
So once we get all the optional language in place, then if you want to adopt the 1,000s each separately, you can. Once we have, a complete policy package with optional language selected, we can do it any way that you want. I think that the recommendation that Troon provides us is adopt the policy as a whole book.
And the advantage of doing that is that we don't have any period of time where we ostensibly have both Troon and Neola policies active and approved by the board at the same time, right? We want to have a clean break between
That would be the advantage
the
of
old
doing this,
policies
yes.
and the new policies.
Yes.
So once we enact the Troon policy, we'll
That's
Yeah.
when it's
break from the
immediately
Neola
transition.
policy.
Yeah, so, on the back of this outline, they provide a guidance on to, repeal current policies and bylaws and put the Troon policies and bylaws in place as a motion.
And I think something for everybody to keep in mind, if we find ourselves in a place where we feel comfortable adopting some of them and putting those on the board meeting agenda for adoption by motion, and we don't yet feel like we can do that with all of them, and there's some advantage to voting on them separately, we can always try, assuming that this would work, we can always try drafting those resolutions so that they don't become effective and operative until all of them have been adopted.
Yeah, I
Right.
think there's probably a way that we could adopt a section in progress to adopting the whole policy manual as a whole, if that's the choice.
Yeah, we would just have to make sure that our motions and resolutions are very clear, that we don't expect the new policies to be in effect until we have the entire policy book ready to supplant the old one. Otherwise, we could have a bit of a mess on our hands, because it's definitely not, I'm sure you guys noticed, it's definitely not a one-to-one
Right,
It's not replacing a
replacement,
section.
so.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, and just to kind of follow up on the process, and to Laura's question, so, we're gonna go through the 1,000s, 2,000s, and 5,000s and look at the various proposed policies within that section of the group of policies and the various options. If we make it, depending on, time allowing, if we get through, 1,000s, 2,000s, and 5,000s, then, the next meeting, we would pick up with the 3,000s and then just continue that process. I think from an efficiency standpoint, as we go through and we start out in the 1,000s and we review these alternative language, if the four of us are all on the same, and we have a consensus among us four that we want option 2 on this one, or we want option 1 on this one, but I think that one should be deemed to be, okay, that's kind of off the table. That's been, sort of a tentative moving, that's going to be ultimately moved forward to a vote. If we get to, on the other hand, if we get to a potential policy where maybe 2 of us would prefer option 1 or 2 of us would prefer option 2, we probably need to sort of place mark, or, do a placeholder for that one. And at the next meeting,
Yeah.
come back to it when there's the other 3. Because, obviously the idea is that once we get through it and we have some sort of a consensus, then, it can we move forward and then review the next policy. So I don't know if we'll have any of those where, we will have a 2-2 split. Actually, even if there's like a 3-1, we probably should do a placeholder.
I think
because-
so too,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
That's a good plan.
Would we, do we want to make sure that we've resolved all of those discussions about optional language at the workshop stage before we bring things to the monthly meeting for a vote? Or would we bring things to a vote with the options up for discussion still?
Do we-
I mean, I
do we have
suppose
to go
we
to
can
a- do
always
we-
raise anything at the meeting.
Do we need to go to a for future action first if we're doing a workshop, or do we go straight to a vote?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm sure that the hope is that we're doing the work now
right.
so that when we are voting, we're ready to go for action, rather than taking a for future and then waiting a
you're-
month to do
That would,
To do
yeah, that would be
action.
That way the policy is adopted as
Right.
quickly as possible and put in place.
Yeah, I mean, if we've spent 6 hours, going through all these various options and we're, at least have a majority at a point where we're gonna, move forward, I don't know that there's really any need to that point to have another for future before it goes for action.
And by reviewing these optional language, we will have reviewed, I think, most of the policies. I don't know the exact number. I didn't count them up, the two, but
So
this would be a heavy part of it that we've already
So
seen.
what would your preference be if, like, to your point, Alicia, if we go through and we say, okay, the four of us all agree on this particular one, we want to do option 2. And so that's, going to be kind of moving forward the process. When we get to the point of actually then having a vote.
Yeah.
You still want to show the other options as the other alternatives
Um,
as an option, or if we've, among us as a consensus, decided, no, we're in favor of just option 2, Chad can clean it up and then it will be at that point in the proposed.
Well, I mean, using the committee of the whole structure means that you have the opportunity for full board participation. It just so happens that only 4 of us were able to make the meeting tonight. So hopefully we will have full and complete engagement and participation as we go through this process, so everybody feels comfortable by the time we get to the board table. I think we have the Google Drive that we all have access to that provides us with the information that came from Troon and the administration's recommendation on some of those optional language choices. Continuing to make sure that that's available for all of us and to make it clear the final version that's coming for a vote reflects option 1 versus option 2, so that any of us that is sitting there waiting to, looking through everything before we actually vote, still has a very clear understanding of the choice that was made and the choice that they're voting on, and can still reference the old language or the optional language if they want to bring that up. I mean, because obviously if any of us is sitting there at vote time and says, you know what, we chose option 2 during the committee meeting, but I'm not comfortable with that anymore, I'd like to advocate for option
Sure.
1. It's still,
Yeah, that's fine.
It's still
That's fine with that.
So to clarify for the board packet, when the time
board
comes, when
packet
this
should
work
be
gets
the
done,
chosen pieces.
you'll have, this is what's going to be up for vote. This is with the choices that come from the committee of the whole,
Clean version of it.
but you will also include the document that was used prior to be able to reference back to that.
I think I like this chart that Chad is starting us out with. And I'm thinking that if we have an updated version of this that references the choice that was made at the committee
Got
level.
it. And attach that as a second document
As a
so that people
document.
know where you started from.
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously they could be here and this is recorded, but
Yeah.
I think that, okay,
And I
thank you.
I think having that chart as part of the board package makes it very clear and easy for folks to find. And then the board members that want to go back and look at what the other options are will still have access to the Google Drive.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
chart was great.
Sounds good.
It was very
Is that
helpful
good?
in guiding through, for sure.
We're
Okay.
gonna do the work today and then we'll connect when it's
So
time.
we'll have a second chart that just indicates specifically what option was chosen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
We're basically gonna.
Yeah.
We're just gonna keep the tally here. It will be like our notes. We're gonna
Yes.
share our notes from
Yep.
these,
I
the
understand.
work that's done in the work sessions. We're
Yep.
gonna
Yeah, I
include
mean,
that
it can be
also.
the same chart, Chad, you could just have.
Just more specific, this was
Exactly.
chosen.
like
Yep,
committee
understood.
But maybe it just has the check.
recommendation,
Correct.
whatever.
There, we
Yep.
checked A versus B.
Yep.
Exactly.
So.
Okay.
Good suggestion.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. All right. So I think everybody good with the process and we can get started on the policies? Okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
All right. I think the first one here that has optional language would be 2101. And really what that is speaking to is the annual contracts that we provide to teachers. It's just selecting specifically which person or group would sign those contracts. And our current practices is Dr. Outlaw signs those annual contracts and they're delivered to our teachers.
Can everybody see that okay? Is that big
Is
enough?
this 2101?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is.
So I had a
20
couple questions for
Yep.
this one, right?
Yep.
So I guess, do you want me to ask those yet, or?
Go ahead.
So the first one is, I'd have to see where they're, adopt and oversee a budget, the advantages and disadvantages of the requiring the fund balance.
So you,
So that was,
That would be-
I'm not jumping ahead.
Oh, the second
yeah,
one.
that was the second option in that one, but that's,
I'm trying to, because now I'm not, I saw it, I did it in a Google Doc. Now I'm
That's
not
okay.
on a Google Doc.
So
I'm
the
here.
first part of it is going to be
Yep,
right
the
up here
first
is,
part,
who do you want to sign the contracts with the teachers? Majority of the board, the president and secretary, or the
And is this
superintendent?
the individual contractor?
individual
So
contracts,
when we hire an
not the
individual,
collective
not the
bargaining
collective
agreements.
bargaining, that was my question. Okay,
Yep.
that was my first question.
Yep. So our current practice is to have the superintendent sign those contracts.
My recommendation is that we would continue that.
I would agree with that.
Okay. The second part of that, Dr. Krebs, is what you're referencing is when it talks about adopt and oversee a budget, there is an optional policy, 3202. Again, it's optional, that actually sets a fund equity level.
So one of the things that, and I think Laura and I kind of mentioned this idea, it's a little confusing kind of going back and forth between some of the different policies. So like for this one, we're talking about this, but it's addressing a future policy that we haven't discussed.
Correct.
So that was a little.
Mhm. So if we were to,
Clarification on that.
that's exactly what that is. 3202 is an optional policy. So if you would adopt that policy at a later date, we would come back and add this optional language to this policy because they're connected in that, because that responsibility about the budget then would link to 3202 specifically if that policy was adopted.
And then, so was this the one that was looking at if there would be the fund, the disadvantages and advantages requiring the fund balance? Was that?
This is your 3202.
That's what 3202 is, yeah.
Correct. 3202 is the optional fund balance policy, which we currently don't have a policy that would do that. So my recommendation here, based on our current practices, would be to not select this optional language until at a later date, if the board decided that 3202 was
Okay.
adopted.
Okay. I'm having a hard time getting through here because, like I said, I was looking at it in Google Docs and now I'm opening it in Word.
Mhm.
So, okay. So I had one more question that wasn't tied to one of the highlighted part, but this was in 10, A10, under the access decision makers. Choosing role, the board access body. A board decision requires a majority vote of the members elected or appointed to and serving on the board. Is that always the case, or is it a majority present?
So that was a question, if you don't mind me
No,
jumping
no,
in.
please. You
So this was a
understand that.
question that we had earlier in the year where we had a 3-1 vote. And we've checked on that, and to pass a motion, we need 4, if we have 7 board members, we need 4 board members, even if only 4 are present. It's of elected members, and that's what we've been told, that is the law, not just, it's not a policy. You can't, I don't believe that you're able to just choose to do 3-1. I think that was the understanding. They came through MASB. They relayed that to
Okay.
us.
Okay, I didn't realize that, I
That was the
guess.
question.
So so
I
even if
was,
it's,
I didn't realize that.
so if you had 5, so if you have 5 board members and
You would still need to have 4 in order for that
Do it then.
motion to go into effect, is what we were told by MASB.
All right.
Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Because that was
Yeah,
a
you would
question
know
that I
that.
had, because we
Yeah.
walked out of a meeting where we had that discussion. Would it be 3 or 4? We asked, and I apologize that I didn't get back to you on that, but that was relayed by MASB.
Okay.
So the recommendation was to table this until we have a chance to review 3202?
So, right, that's the recommendation.
Is that what you want to do instead of potentially move, because as, we don't have anything comparable to the 3202 requirement for a minimum fund balance in effect right now. So I think what the administration was proposing was that we adopt the policy package that would supplant what we have today, and then come back to things like 3202 that are not covered by existing policy, but we should think through and decide whether we want
Is
them.
that the way,
Are you-
okay.
are you okay with that?
I just wasn't sure how we were gonna approach
Yeah,
that.
so if we do ultimately decide we want 3202, we would at the same time have to amend this section A7 of 2101 to match
To
what we
reference
do in
that.
3202.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we can adopt we can choose to adopt 2101 without the blue highlighted language in A7, since we are not yet addressing 3202.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah, so,
For me.
yeah, it works for me, and I would like to revisit 3202 at some point, that's one of them.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but not right now, yeah, let's get the.
Laura, does
the
that work for you?
package.
I was just wondering if, like, in here it says your recommendation is not to adopt 3202.
At this time?
Yeah,
At this
at this time, yeah.
Just at this time?
Just as we're adopting the
Just
policy package.
Get the
correct.
basics and then get
Yes.
to the optional after
Yes.
you have,
Exactly.
once we've transitioned to Troon, then let's get after the originals.
Okay.
Or,
Yep.
the new ones, optionals.
Okay.
So you have what you need on that one?
I
Okay.
do. Yep.
So next.
So the next really goes down at 2203.
Just a second.
I'm sorry.
2104,
I'm sorry, did I skip one?
yeah, that was the optional policy.
It's an optional policy, yes.
Student rep. So
Yes.
that's not the way we have students come out to the board.
That is not.
That's not, would this be a voting, is
My understanding is that it would be a student participant and a non-voting
not voting
member.
vote.
Correct.
Okay, so we don't have that. So
We don't, so
Is
that's
your-
why I have it listed as optional.
is the suggestion,
This
recommendation
would be
to
one of the
not-
ones that we would adopt down the road after we get our policy package in place, if that were
Okay.
a desire of the board.
Yeah, because the current student rep is just, is sort of an informal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Skip over that one. So I think the next one, policy that has optional language is 2203. And it has a number of optional pieces there.
I have a couple questions on this one.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's the
go
only
ahead. I've
questions.
got them here, I think.
So I'm not, I have to see where they tie to. So there's the optional, the financial one. Okay, so I'm not,
So I think your first question was under L. How does this relate to our current practice and policy? This would
is
mirror.
this for the sex education?
Correct.
Yes.
This would mirror exactly what we
This is
have to do.
exactly what we do.
Right.
Okay.
And on these curriculum ones, this is where I met with Dr. Mosier.
Okay, so that was the other question I had. So Liz has already
Her and I
done.
went through these all that require curriculum and made sure that the options that we have selected here match what our current practice is and or what our current policies are, yes. So the recommendation there would be to include that optional language, the A1L language.
Okay.
And consistent with that, then with the L, we would also adopt
Yeah.
option 2 in the policy 5420.
Yes, there's a few optional policies that we currently have practice and procedures for, so I've included that in here. When we get to those. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep. Any questions on?
Yeah, I had a question about does this one get to the financial literacy?
Yeah.
So, do we have a financial literacy? I know we have a class, but we don't have I know we have personal finance, and we know we have all the other options. So I guess I want to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, do we have a requirement?
Mhm.
So state law was just recently passed to add financial literacy as a requirement, and it would start with this year's 8th graders.
Okay.
This is going to be the first class. So by the time they graduate, they will have had to take that. We've had
So
some
is it a
initial,
course, or can it be part?
there's content from the state side that needs to be covered. And we've had some initial conversations on this. We do have a course at the high school, but we'd like to be able to give students options so that they're not having to walk away from other electives and
That was my
career,
question. Yeah.
career type courses and band and choir. So we are looking at some other options as well, and we'll go through that process of curriculum. But we do have a financial course. What is it called? Personal
Personal
finance.
finance. I
And
mean,
it's,
so I mean, because
it's
the
in the
idea
Family
too is I
Consumer
know,
Science
like
Department.
with financial literacy, you can, there's the accounting version, there's kind of the math version, there's
Yeah.
the home science, what is it, consumer science kind of
Yeah.
thing. So there's the different versions
Yeah.
of what it comes in.
Yeah.
And like in a math perspective, I mean, it wouldn't have to be a whole course, it's understanding compound interest kind of
Absolutely.
things, exponential growth.
So we'll need to,
So-
see, all of the content that's required. Some of it will be covered, on economics and
That's-
it
yeah.
will be touching in different spots, but, we're really, we're concerned about adding another thing. The students have 24 selections in high school. and
Right.
To add another requirement
How many
takes away
requirements do they
another
have?
choice. So there are 17 credits that students have. There's an option for personal curriculum. But if you just do the math on it, you're in band.
Mhm.
You have 17 requirements and you're in band. Maybe you get one elective a year, band, choir, any long. So it limits. So we're trying to give some options.
Okay, so that's kind of what I was hoping, is that it's not going to be adding another course.
Yeah. Well, there definitely is another requirement, but we're going to try
Try
to
to
give some options.
kind
Or
of
perhaps there's summer
match it.
options for people to get that off their list. And
Okay.
so.
So we don't think it's something that can be built into, say, your math curriculum, so it's not it's not a separate course requirement?
Yeah, so we need to see what all the content expectations are in it. And then Liz and team would need to go through and see where it fits, where it might naturally fit. I feel like a lot of our business classes touch on these pieces. We have our personal finance class that will touch on these, but do they?
But most
is-
students don't take those.
That class
Yeah.
may not be aligned with what the state has just set up, so we
Yeah.
have to do some exploration.
Again, is this something they could be taking in potentially 8th grade, or is the hope that they take it in high school? I mean, some students probably could handle it in 8th grade. some.
We have to do some legwork on this one. Again, it starts with those content expectations. I'm really glad that we're going to require it because I think it's an important topic. I'm just worried about choices. So in the spirit of choice, we want to give students choice that fits within what they want to do. It doesn't box them further into a corner with elective offerings.
That's what I was hoping. Again, I mean, I'm never going to say no to take more math classes, right?
Exactly.
So the idea behind the recommendation to not adopt this is to give us more flexibility in how we ultimately align with that new requirement from the state? Is that the idea behind the recommendation to not adopt this language, this alternative? This one is proposing to adopt the model curriculum approved by the MDE, and
Yeah,
Right.
the recommendation is to not.
Well, right. My understanding is that this was prior to the law coming out about financial literacy. So there was the option to do this. District didn't have to. It was just a choice
Oh, I
that they
see.
had. So I think this is independent of now the requirement that everyone has to do it. So it's no longer an option, we have to. And so that's why this is, not adopting this doesn't mean we're not going to have to be in compliance with what the new school
Oh,
code
right,
and law
sure.
is.
We're just
So this-
choosing not to adopt the model curriculum that's currently out there. We're waiting to see
Right.
what the
I
standards
would,
are.
Right.
I
so
would
we
not
can do
adopt the
something
model
else.
curriculum.
Correct.
I would not,
Right.
at this time, don't box us into a corner. So I'd,
Exactly.
I'd leave it sit.
Doesn't change the fact that we're going to have to meet those content expectations. It just is, we may want to do it in a way that gives us the flexibility to give kids choice in how they meet those standards.
That'd be great. We don't
Okay.
have to-
Yeah, so I'm good with all those.
And I think I skipped over, I got excited about the math, I guess.
That's-
American Sign Language. So the
Yes.
idea is that it will count as foreign language credit. Is that what this is about? I mean, because I think it has in the past, right?
Yes, we
And
do
so we are
now,
going to
this
continue it.
would be- This would match
That will continue that.
practice,
Okay.
yes.
Just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with all of the administration's recommendations for that policy section.
For 2203?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, likewise.
Mhm.
2303, this is, we don't have a policy quite like this currently, but this is part of their package, and the optional language in the package under B is just to make a choice. Select the option related to who may initiate an investigation. And the recommendation there, just based on our practices, that would be done by majority of the board.
We don't have that practice, or we,
No.
No, we don't have a
We
comparable
don't have something
policy
similar
like
to
this.
2303 currently. This is part of True's package though, this policy.
So the question basically is just whether it's the president alone initiating the investigation or the board, or it being done through a majority of the board.
and the majority is 4.
Correct.
Now
Of
this
the
is
elected board.
of the elected board.
Yes.
Yep.
So are we not making the decisions now? So you didn't have a recommendation. You said that this one's up to the board.
It says
No,
No, I said,
choose the option that
Oh,
requires the
recommendation
majority
based
of the
on what-
board.
right.
seems to be the most consistent practice would be
Right.
the majority of the board.
Is it consistent practice with us, or is this around
That would be the most common practice.
most common practice?
We don't have this as a board.
Got it?
The board has been moving into that particular, where the
Kind of
majority of the
slogan.
board's making the decision. So between those two things is where that recommendation came from.
Okay, thank you.
And so if the majority of the board was adopted as the option here, then there would have to be a meeting and a motion and approved by a majority of the board to initiate that investigation. Is that right?
That is correct.
But this is just about an investigation. This doesn't necessarily say a consequence or anything like
Correct.
that.
Right.
Correct.
Well, the consequences are in B,
Right.
and that is, since it's an action by the board, that will
Okay.
require
Right.
a majority vote of the elected members.
So does it matter if it's be a special meeting, or
Does it matter what?
if it would have to be like a special meeting
No,
or just a regular board
It
meeting?
could be a regular board meeting. It
Yeah.
could be a regular agenda item on a board meeting.
though section A2 does say that the affected board member may ask that the
Closed session.
investigation be conducted through closed session. Or discuss the alleged
Right.
agenda item, sorry, at the
The
closed
vote just
session.
to commence an investigation, I don't think would,
We can't vote in closed session,
Right.
so,
that would have to be an open session.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm okay with that.
yeah, me too.
Yep, I am too.
All right, 2305. I don't have it in my, oh, my turn.
All the traveling.
2305, the first part, board member carpools, current language doesn't exist in our current policy, so the recommendation there was just not to adopt that optional language.
I would agree.
Okay. Include optional language that the board wants to establish monetary limits for the reimbursement of board member meal expenses. Current policy does not specify the amount of reimbursement.
Okay, so like, I know like at the university, like we're tied to federal
Mhm.
kind of guidelines. Are we tied to that as a district? I mean,
With
is
the
it-
IRS guidelines for
Yeah.
what you can business
Yes, there are
expense.
limitations. I don't know specifically if those same limitations apply to board members or not. But I do know we as
As employees?
as teachers, as administrators, yes, we have certain, limitations on, what the reimbursement or totals would be for those expenses.
I can tell you that I did forget to deduct my mileage driving back and forth to Brandon 2 years ago. And I didn't get reimbursed, so the federal government owes me
That's right.
probably like $6.
That's what I was gonna say, bro.
Did you carpool? It wasn't
We didn't,
required.
right, we didn't even carpool, we all
Did
drove
not carpool.
separate, right? Yeah.
Can we ask our director of finance if there are statutes or regulations that we can simply refer back to instead of setting an amount?
Yes, we can ask Mike. I did
Or
sit
ask,
down
or
with,
ask Troon if they have something
Yeah.
like that they do that. Because I can see, to the extent that any board member actually submits for those reimbursements, it should be limited by whatever standards the district has for other employees, and those have
Right.
to have a home. It's easier to refer back to wherever that lives than to keep track of it as it changes. Because the IRS sets new mileage standards every year. We don't want to have to update this to change the pennies every year.
Yes, I did sit with Mr. Engelder here and went over these specific options, and these were recommendations that he was.
So the recommendation is to not include any of the optional.
Correct.
So what would that mean then? That because we didn't set a standard, all of those other things apply?
So the board may reimburse, like what I have up here, like for example, meals. May reimburse a board member only for the expenses actually unreasonably occurred, blah, blah, blah. So that's the policy.
But it says.
So the option is, you want to put up there, like, you can only ask for $50 or, getting really specific.
Yeah.
Or the dinner won't exceed this. You can have this, but no appetizers, It's getting really specific,
Right.
In the
Right,
statement above,
and
right,
I
it
don't-
says.
I don't think that that's helpful,
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
but I do.
Go down.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know, if I was drafting this policy, I would say that reimbursement caps are governed by, and then cite the section of statute or reg that governs what the district's actually allowed to pay for. Because that has to live somewhere, right? It
Yeah.
can't just be a matter of board policy. I mean, like, we shouldn't be able to adopt a policy that says we'll reimburse hotel expenses up to $1,000 a night, because that would be crazy. The district wouldn't do that for any of its employees, and the board shouldn't be getting anything more than we would reimburse for employees on business travel.
So we could definitely establish that as a practice. The part here that gives the ability is the approval of those expenses has to be approved by majority of the board.
I don't
And
know
not
that-
set the limits in the policy.
I
And
don't
then we
know
could
that
use
that-
those as a guide based on what Mr. Engelder will provide as for what
Oh,
the
you know, I mean,
limitations are for other.
Do we want it to be a majority of the board, or is it, I would rather have it set, I don't,
Yeah, I mean, does it mean it has to come before the board?
It
all the
does. It
expenses
means
and
that-
everything? Yeah.
That for that, trip to Brandon, Ken,
For
Roger, and I
Roger's
would have
mileage.
needed
For my
to.
mileage to Brandon.
I mean, I support having the mileage request come back to the board, so, or whatever expense reimbursement come back to the board for review. But I think it would be helpful if the policy acknowledged that there was a limit beyond just what a majority of the board would approve.
Do you think there is an IRS limit?
I would
Yeah.
be confident that there is a limit on what can be expensed for a government body. Yeah, I mean, it may not be an IRS thing, it may be an MDE regulation that, because I'm sure that you can't say you needed to stay at the Ritz-Carlton over the weekend, right? I mean,
So, but that, I totally agree with you, but I'm just not sure that the government, and that's something maybe Chad can check out. Just haven't been through some of this stuff. They're gonna have things in there that allowable expenses, you can spend it on this, you can't spend it on. They're not gonna be a limitation on what hotel or how much it costs.
Okay,
They're gonna have the mileage recommendation,
Right.
but if this district made a decision to go beyond that, there's no, like, you wouldn't, like, if you said, okay, if we negotiated that we're gonna reimburse at a different mile or something
Right.
like that. So anyway, I
I do
think
know
checking
that,
out
like,
that, I
for-
just don't know that the
For a
government.
federal grant, it, your hotel reimbursement would change based on where you're staying too.
Yeah.
So New York City would be different than Brighton, if you're staying at a hotel in New York
Yeah, I
City.
mean, as a practical
no,
matter,
that's true.
yeah, I mean, as a practical matter too, like, the only one that comes to mind to me is, so last year I attended the MASB
Yeah.
annual conference as the voting delegate. Ken did a couple of years before. Star just, Star had to register me,
Mhm.
and part of the registration was, I stayed right there at the hotel where, so it wasn't even a reimbursement. I mean, it was just the district paid for it directly as part of the overall registration. So, I mean,
Right.
other than, I don't know, I suppose there would be instances where, a board member would pay for his or her own, hotel, but, I think as a practical matter, if there truly is board-related, travel or, I mean, that, as a practical matter, the best practice would be to just have it be paid, through the registration, through stuff, through the district in advance, if it's something that is.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we still have to have limits on those types of expenses too. I mean, it shouldn't be
No, I agree.
free for all, but
Right, no, I understand. I understand what you're saying,
No,
but
and I
But
agree. I just don't know that there's going to be that government
that's
piece
fair.
that's going to help you with it, because I don't think they set limits. I know of another district in this state that is notorious for spending a lot of money with board expenses. And, the voters would have to address that if it was, and then obviously there's transparency and all that kind of
Sure.
stuff. And-
Yeah, I do
And then-
appreciate
and then
having
the
the
board
board
would check
vote
it.
before we
Yeah.
reimburse. That's, I think that's a good check on the system.
Right.
But if there isn't anything that we can tie it to, that we would all agree to tie it to, I would support just, skipping the optional language and relying on the board review as the check. But if we can tie it to something, if there is something that's viable out there, I would like to know.
And the language of reasonably incurred. I mean, I know reasonably is not quantitative.
So if you could follow up.
Yeah.
let
Can disagree
them
about what
know
is
on
reasonable.
that,
Reasonable
and
has to
then
do with
Yep.
location.
Assume no,
yeah, well, that too, right, it's,
language doesn't exist.
Sure. It's all relative.
Okay, no, that sounds fair. And then Mike will know this, and he'll be able to very quickly,
The funny thing is how much have we really spent on this? I mean,
like, nothing.
When was
It's
the
like
last
zero.
time any of us submitted reimbursements? Yeah.
besides
No,
that.
this,
Well, I didn't
And you
even
didn't do a
I didn't even
reimbursement, yeah.
reimbursement, right, I mean,
No.
right. It was-
Yeah.
Okay.
very inexpensive board, I'll just say that. Okay, we're done with 35.
Yep, 2306. This is an optional policy, but our current practice is to not compensate board members for attendance at meetings, subcommittee meetings, or other performances of an authorized duty as a board member. So this was an optional policy that would be recommended to adopt because it supports our current practice.
I agree.
Agreed.
So if I could just throw one thing out there on this one, I think this is fine for now, but down the road, there's sometimes, people that run for board that have young children and things like that. So that could be a discussion down the road. And I've heard of boards that have, done some compensation, like minimal, so that they're able to pay for babysitters for all the meetings and things like that. That might be something down the road that, might,
I'm gonna do it the year I'm running.
what's that?
I'm not doing it the year I'm running.
Right, I think we're good. No, absolutely. But just throwing that out there, just keep that in the back of your mind. I know that that's been a discussion at at our meetings where, I was been at a couple meetings where board members have talked about that in other districts that most everybody says, no, it's just the way it is. But so just putting it out there.
Okay. 2403, selection of 4 or 6 years for board member terms. 4 is our current selection. That would be the recommendation there, stay with 4.
So just a second, I think I had a question back on
Oh,
one before that. 2401, do we specify the 3-4 split? What was my question?
2401?
2401?
24, yeah, I had a question. So I guess I didn't ask a question, but I had a question here.
Okay,
At least one board member must be elected at each regular election. So this is every 2 years, right? This is just, so right now we have a 4-3 split, right? So one election, we have 4 officers and then, or 4 trustees, and then 2 years later, we have 3.
Mhm.
Is
Do we
that-
need to codify that here? Is that
That's
what
my
you're asking?
question. Do we need that put in here, or is that just a?
Well,
I think it's just a natural.
yeah,
That's what we're doing, but do we need it in policy?
Well, I guess the other question is, I mean, I know that some other boards have actually staggered to try to reduce the potential of a large turnover in any given election. I mean, right now, about half the board is up for, half or more than half the
Right.
board is up every
2 years.
Every 2 years.
Right. Because I know that some of them have actually gone, and I don't, frankly, I'm not sure it can be done through the policy process, but I know that some of the boards have now like done some staggering of 6-year terms. I mean, I saw it on the ballot.
I remember at the MASB, the training that we went to, that some people were like running for 4-year terms, some were running for 6-year
6-year,
terms.
right.
And some on the same board, like the same board has different
Right.
term lengths.
And the theory behind it was so you only maybe had 2 seats up on any given election. I don't know if that's an objective that we want to try to pursue, but the only way we'd be able to do that is if we did deviate from obviously our current 4-year.
Either change from
term.
4 to 6 or something, and yeah, I mean, I don't,
Or you couldn't do it this election cycle,
Mhm.
but in 2 years, you could say one of these seats is going to be
A
a
6-year.
6-year term, yeah. It would have to be something that would have to be a rolling process in order to achieve where you're getting, you couldn't just do it all in one fell
Right.
swoop. But, I mean,
right, right, I don't know if we want to do that, but I didn't know if we needed if we needed more detail in this 2401.
I would say, and if you want to jump in here, that you don't have to put that in there. I think this just states the requirement that you have to have at least one that changes that's voted on every election.
Right.
So if the current practice just happens to be a 4-3, then would you just stay with that? If you wanted to adjust it, then you would be, at 6.
So then if
down the
somebody
road.
would resign, if somebody would resign, that would be an appointment, that would not be necessary. So there'd be an appointment to complete their term, or would it be an election?
From a resignation, it would be an appointment from the board. If it's, if it was in the case of a recall, you end up going to an election.
Okay.
but
It could be a special election then, if it's a recall, or
Yeah,
the
at
next.
Whatever that next cycle would be.
But I think, although I can't say this with any degree of certainty, the duration of the term of that new appointee depends on when that appointment takes place. So let's say,
Correct.
a successful candidate in this upcoming election, for whatever reason, next February resigns, or whatever, at any point in time in
Right.
2023 resigns, I think that seat has to then run
Next
in the
cycle.
next election, which would
I think
mean
so.
then that we would have 5 seats up.
I thought the appointee filled the remaining term.
I think if it's only the last 2 years, that's why I said, I don't know, I'm not 100% certain, but I think its impact, I don't know that an appointee then serves, 3+ years. I think if it's at that stage, I think they have to then be, elected at the next general election.
Well, so getting back to this particular policy section, is there any advantage to codifying what we currently do with the 4-3 split here I mean, or does it matter? Because if we're legally required to have that new appointee fill only until the next election, then it doesn't matter what we wrote in the policy
Right.
anyways. So it doesn't prevent us from having 5 people.
And if the board members are elected for a 4-year term, then at the end of 4 years,
Right.
somebody has to be elected for that position.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally don't think we need to add
Okay.
language about, the 4-3 or, and obviously, our current situation is 4 years so we would just go, with the 4-year preference.
Right.
And then that's a whole other discussion if we want to try to implement some sort of stagger in the future, but.
Yeah.
So is that one set?
Everyone okay?
So,
Yeah.
We'll keep that one as
Stay with
is.
4 years, okay.
And then, what was it? 2405
2405.
acknowledges the 4-year term that we all currently have.
Is that the only thing that's in this?
Okay.
And 20,
And
in that one.
then 2405 gets to the officers too, doesn't it?
Right, so 2405, the first option there is dictating that board officers must be board members,
Yes.
which is our current, right? So I select option
And
one.
The treasurer is the only one that they were saying that potentially
Correct.
might not have been. Is it just for the background, just so that they have a financial background? Is
Could
that?
be. I've never known that
didn't know that
to
was-
be the case.
You know, that was.
An option.
Yeah, an
Right,
option.
right, right. I learned a lot, especially about board functions through this section. So option B is not necessary there if we're going with option one, requiring officers to be members. And then option one language, so we would select option one language there in D3.
I do think it's important to point out that this is not the process that we vote our board members on today.
Right.
This is, if the way this would play out, you could have multiple candidates up for one vote. And if so we could have 3 board members vying to be the president, and then we vote. And if there isn't a majority, then
Take
we
the
have
top
to
two.
take the top 2 and vote again. Instead of what we do today, where we vote one.
Rapid fire nomination process.
Yes. Yes. And I think this is a more fair way to elect our officers. So I support this new arrangement.
I agree.
Okay, thank you. 2501. Meetings are currently conducted under Robert's Rules of Order. So we would adopt, in order to keep that the same, adopt language H that identifies Robert's Rules of Order as the parliamentary procedure.
It's actually I, isn't it? Jack, I believe that, isn't it I?
Actually,
Yes, I'm
I
sorry.
had a question before we got to that. C2.
Yes,
did you
I
have
did, I saw the same
C2?
thing. I absolutely agree with what you're gonna say needs to be changed.
Okay,
We changed that to 3, I thought,
Yeah, we did.
to schedule a emergency meeting
Yes.
so our
Okay.
current policy changes that to 3.
thank you. I will,
And I would support aligning to our current policy.
all right, so
Voting.
2501.
Oh, yeah.
C2 needs to be changed to 3.
Mhm.
Yep.
Noted, okay.
And then was there a question? I thought that, okay, so what was remote participation. Was that my comment?
Yes, it was.
So, so my I guess,
Oh, we're on 2501A now?
no, 2501. Oh, okay, right. So then it goes forward to 2501A.
Yeah.
So I wanted clarification on that. So that was, yeah,
Yes. So,
okay. Did we, so then what was I? So that was just saying following parliamentary procedure.
yes,
Okay, I'm a little slow here.
nope, it's,
It's like, we reference everything.
right.
Okay, so
All right.
2501A.
So 2501A, as we all know, because of COVID, there was a lot of changes in the Open Meetings Act as far as electronic meetings and participation, especially when voting was involved. That was pared back to, I think, what was the original requirements for Open Meetings Act. But this policy now is in line with Open Meetings Act with respect to electronic board meetings and participation of board members, limiting to that when that can occur.
So the one question I had here,
So the optional language there on 4 just dictates the notification timelines and to which individuals that needs to be done in order for that meeting to be conducted electronically or electronic or remote participation.
Right, because if a board member is going to be participating electronically, then the public has to have
Correct.
the same ability, which
Same
you need the ability to provide the notice. Yeah.
Correct. And the ability to facilitate that.
Right.
Absolutely, yes.
and okay, so disability.
But but my understanding is that because it was constantly changing, and at one point it was military service or illness.
That's right.
And that's still,
That's
that's
now
under
back where
C.
it's at.
Oh,
That's
it's
under
Well,
C.
before, because of COVID, right, you could participate remotely and all
Right.
those things that they opened up. It's back to military service or a disability.
Right. Well, it says, or other reason permitted by Michigan law,
Right.
whatever, sort of the catch-all. But yeah, my understanding was that illness was no longer a legitimate basis to.
Correct, I'm sorry.
Right.
The
Yeah.
disability versus the illness.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay, so in D2, if we have a board member that satisfies those conditions and is going to participate remotely, who needs to be notified?
Correct. So my recommendation there was just the president, superintendent, and the administrative assistant, just so that multiple people are getting that notification so they can begin the process of facilitating that.
Yeah.
So can they participate but not vote?
Oh, yeah, they can vote. If they meet.
If they meet, but if they don't meet those two requirements, disability,
Participate.
they
and
can't
cannot
participate, they can't,
Well, correct. They can
they can,
observe,
Right.
obviously, but we wouldn't be able to participate and vote.
Okay.
Remote.
so the limit to their the limit, I guess, somebody has to be away for something. They couldn't call into a meeting and be involved in the discussion, but not vote.
No, that's not an option anymore.
That's not an option.
Right.
Okay. That's what I wanted to clarify. They could participate and call to the public. But no, they can't because they'd have to be here, right?
If we were allowing remote call to the public, but
But
we're
we're
not
not, so
required
never-
to
okay.
allow,
Okay,
and we have not been.
we have not been.
So
Okay.
to fill in the blanks here, notice to the president, superintendent, and superintendent's administrative assistant, 18 hours in advance? Or do we need it to be 36 hours in advance so we have time to meet that 18-hour notice requirement? Is that?
That's why I put 36, just gives us more time to make
Because with
the-
military and disability, these are not going to be ones that bring up.
They should not, but, I mean, they could.
If we have a
But that, I
reserve.
mean, we have a notice requirement to the public, so it has to be,
Right.
it has to be met. And if you can't meet it because something has happened, then unfortunately you can't participate in the meeting.
Yep.
Okay,
Okay.
Good with that.
2502. This is about preparation of the board agenda.
So does this say something about consent agendas? Because I thought Mike said something that this is something we've never used. Is this something we would want to start using, or is this, I don't know if this is,
This doesn't specifically address consent agendas. This is basically the way that the agenda for the meetings is developed.
so the consent agenda has to do with the voting,
The
correct?
consent agenda would be a different action the board would take to develop a consent agenda and then go through the processes of what's on it and how that is, the voting would go for a consent agenda. So
Okay.
this is separate from a consent
This is
consent
just the
agenda.
This is
Correct.
just the agenda.
Yes.
how would a consent agenda work?
So, in my previous district, we had a consent agenda, and it was typically the boilerplate things like the minutes from the policy committee and this, and whatever it might be, the HR, like, if it was just a, general report, not hiring of people. So it might be things that were boilerplate that the board could vote on. It just speeds up the process. That's it.
So it's not so much an agenda as it is, this is a package of things we're going to do one vote on.
It's like we're going to just put this all as a package, as a consent, and then you vote all of that as,
Gotcha.
all of it as one.
Right, and then there is a member can request the removal of any individual item for further discussion.
I really don't think it's necessary. I think it's more transparent right now to just call it what it is.
Yeah.
These are the minutes.
Yeah.
If there's any concern about minutes.
Yeah, Neola currently has a policy that allows the board to adopt a consent agenda separate. And certainly if that's something the board wanted to do down the road, we could always put it in. It's independent of this particular policy.
Okay.
Okay. Everyone okay? 2506 then as those recommendations there?
2503, I have a comment on.
I'm sorry, I said 2502.
2502 we were good with.
2502 we're good with.
All right.
I had a question about 2503. The roll call vote. Who can call for a roll call vote? Currently, anybody can call for a roll call vote. This is saying will be conducted when required by law or when requested by the president or secretary. The board may adopt additional policies designating other matters. Do we want to, our current practice is anybody on the board can call them. Do we want to adopt it so that we're following current policy, or do we want to follow this more carefully?
And I thought in Roberts, let's talk to Roberts. I thought that it addressed who could call a roll call. But either way, I mean, you know, if it is our current policy is to allow anyone to request a roll call vote.
And we don't even vote on whether we're going to have a roll call vote. So it's just if somebody says the words,
Then we do it.
conduct a roll call vote. Does everybody have to approve what?
Roll call.
I don't know. I don't know what's required in, Roger's looking at Robert's.
So I
rules.
think the practical side of it, if you're having people voting yes and no on the same thing, it makes it clear.
Mhm.
Sometimes with a voice vote, you know, could be some confusion, I guess. So-
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, there are only 7 of us, so it's not like it takes an extra half hour to do a roll call vote, like it would if there were dozens and dozens of trustees.
Right.
So I don't know that it makes a practical difference.
I agree with,
to-
I just wanted to, I just didn't know if we should be aligned with what our practice.
Yeah.
Our policy should align with our practice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with changing the language to allow anyone to request a roll call vote. You guys are fine with
I'm
that?
okay with that. I just,
Yeah. So in that 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph, it
Yep.
would be when requested by
any board member,
any board member
any board member.
or any trustee. I don't know.
Any
what the
trustees, and
language
that would
is.
be the only,
Board member, yeah.
it would only be board members who could call it.
Right. Correct. Okay. We'll update that language.
Okay.
$2504.
Oh, I had questions.
Which one?
I read them. I was sitting at my computer for a long time, so I had lots of time to look at these. I'm reading them. In terms of the names, that was my question had to do with if people had to give their names. This is referring to the call to
Oh,
the
for the
public.
public comment?
Right.
So we're in 2504?
That's what you said, right?
We are,
Yeah.
yep.
B1, state the name and address. Before a member of the public will state his or her name or address. I know we have some people that don't want to do that. So again, do we just, and I know they write it on their cards. So do we want, again, we want the policy to match what we're doing, I think.
Right, so that's what I have on the recommendation. Obviously, I haven't done that in here because I wanted to just see the policy as it is. But my recommendation would be adopt policy as presented that reflects our current practice.
Okay.
So if everyone's happy with our current call to public practice, then I would go here and update these parts that speak to that. So that would be having to fill out the card in full, but not necessarily having to state like in that particular situation.
Having to put the name and address on the
Right.
card,
On
but
the
not
card.
necessarily state it
Fully
in public.
complete our call to the public card,
Okay.
but doesn't dictate what they have to do.
Especially with us recording, live
Yep.
streaming, I think,
Okay.
as long as people are sharing that information with us, I mean, Roger has it right in front of them, then I think it's okay that they don't share address. and
Is
things like
anybody
that.
not willing to share their address on the card?
That has happened in the past. I don't know if that's happened lately.
I can tell you that there has been instances lately where people just put like Hartland, but they won't put like street address, and they'll
Right.
say Hartland, Michigan. So, you know, I haven't refused to allow somebody to speak but, I mean, you know, that's something we should probably,
So is the board okay with it being district of residence instead of address?
Well, district doesn't, one thing about it, I mean, district doesn't tell us which elementary school.
Well, but do we
I mean, if
need
they're
that?
talking about Hawkins, I want to know if they're a Hawkins resident. Right? Or not?
It's certainly valuable to know. But do we need them to say that? I mean, we've been allowing comments without folks saying that out loud, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I'm okay with them not stating it out loud as long as it's on the card, I guess would be my thought.
What do we use the addresses for? Like after the meeting?
Do you ever contact, I mean, wasn't one of the things said in case you want to contact them?
We don't need the addresses. From the administration side, we don't need addresses. It is good to know that it's our resident, because if they're our resident, then we would look them up and we would, you know, follow up if we needed to do that, especially if it's district parents. We have all their information already. And, you know, just do their student connects. But, you know, I'm fine with resident, you know, district residents. I don't think we need people's specific, especially with the way things are going right now. I think there's just a lot of, you know,
If we're only going to
Challenging
residents, I'd like
behavior
them
right
to
now.
state their residence then, so that when they're making their comments, that they stated their residence. I don't feel like that's
the district of
their
residents.
district of residence. I feel like that's okay for them to state that that's not giving privileged and private information, whereas the address is. But I
Yeah.
feel like they should say if they're a Heartland resident, they're a Heartland district or Brighton or Howell.
That'd be great.
So what you're asking for then is that we have them there, we ask that anyone that's going to speak fill out our card with their full name and their district of residence. And then when they're speaking, they're going to tell us their name and their district of residence as well.
I don't know. I'm not sure, but I feel like when we're hearing their comments, it's important for us to, I think we should know.
Right. But you could say, you know, I'm calling forward Matt Outlaw from Brighton. I'm calling forward Matt Outlaw.
I mean, that
from
could be,
Howell.
because I'm calling them up, so,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like.
It's written right there. They don't even have to
who
say
they are,
it.
because I've already said who they are.
So yeah, if you could do just, again, not the address, but just their
Just the-
resident,
Yeah.
their district.
The card.
I could say,
Okay.
so-and-so from Brighton, or so-and-so from Howell, or so-and-so from,
Or just assume that they're from Brighton, and if anybody who's not from Brighton, then you share it.
well, they would still have to, then it's just a matter of the practical matter of me, what I say, but they would still have to put that information on the card.
But then would a school of choice kid, or school of choice parent be,
Well, I mean, I feel like
Um,
most of our parents are going to be very forthcoming about exactly,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I don't think that's a concern, but I agree that knowing, especially, you know, for folks that are coming to comment on things that we're about to vote on, it is important for us to know whether we're hearing the voices of the people that live here and go to school here versus
Pay taxes here and everything.
folks that yeah, don't pay taxes here and don't send their kids to school here. So a district, so I think for the purposes of this policy then, what we're talking about is drafting B1 to say that before addressing the board, they have to fill out the comment card and be called up to the podium by the president, who will state their name and district of residence.
Should it say something, if the information is not provided, you will not be called forward?
It does at the
It
backside.
says that. Okay.
It says that the president or other representative determined that a member of the public has violated one or more of these rules and refuses to come into compliance, that they will lose their opportunity to speak.
And could we just say, well, you know, we have 3 incomplete cards, or I can hand it back to the person and say you have to complete the card when they turn it in?
Yep.
Because I always review it. I wouldn't even give that to Roger.
Right, yeah, that would
Yeah.
be, if there's a
I could go right-
gatekeeper over there, right.
I can just go right back and say, you know, you didn't fill in this. I'm not willing to. I'm sorry, you have to.
do they
And
don't,
that's,
They don't
I-
have to put their comments down, do they? They don't have to put what their comments are tied to, or do you ask? them?
We
Well-
still leave them that option to write something if they don't want
Right.
to come up to the
Yep.
podium, and I
If they
think
don't
that's
want to
good.
speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we probably need to update the comment card then to match this policy. So it would say district instead of, and if we did that before the policy was adopted, that probably would work too. Because I don't think our current policy requires that full address, and we haven't been in practice requiring that full address. It might also, if we're looking at the comment cards, it might be good to remind put a warning at the top or the bottom that says if you don't fill out all of the information, you may not be called.
Got it.
Or you will not
I'm
be
gonna grab one
called.
of the cards and write the notes right on it, so I can hand it to Star, so.
Yeah. And that's, Roger's really good about, reading the rules of the road before we start call to the public,
I
and
like it
that would
when
be
you have
part
the
of that.
person on deck. I think that really helps
Helps
them.
be, yeah, it gets
Helps
them
them
prepared.
ready.
and- yeah.
Not that we've had like piles
Also
of
Star
lots of
brought you
them.
guys snacks, so.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Take it fast.
So just to review, I'll make sure that this follows our current practice with a couple of things that we talked about in the comment card.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
2506. So the select between whether a board will conduct an organizational meeting at the first regular meeting of the calendar year or the first regular meeting of the fiscal year. I have calendar year option and other optional language follows our current practice. So that would be the recommendation.
Yeah. I
Just
don't
a
see-
second. Okay, that was 2506. I think I had a question on 2505. Question on 20, let me find it. 2505. My question had to do with, what's 2505 about?
All right, pull it up right here.
2505.
Board committees.
Right, who's assigning committees? I think our current practice is the president is assigning them. But we're not having committees now, are we? Is do,
We don't currently have any.
I think
The
it's a
board
good idea
determines
to
a
have the
ki-
language
okay.
there, because you may,
but
choose to
two
go
is
back
saying the
to
board
that.
determines a committee's membership. That wasn't our current practice when we had committees, was it?
Well, I mean, yeah, we didn't vote on it, but it was kind of a consensus thing, wasn't it?
I thought the president gave us, we kind of said which ones we wanted, and then the president assigned them.
Yeah.
So, this was one that was not on Chad's list?
No, right.
No, because it doesn't have optional language on it.
Right,
Right.
so I think we'll circle back to all of the ones that, I think it would be good for us to be able to, ask questions about, because, I didn't read all of the one, and I went through the ones that were on Chad's list, for purposes of tonight, but I think probably in meeting 3, we can come back, and any of the ones that were not having optional language, that we had specific questions, that would be a good opportunity. As far as the committee, I think, obviously, we still have ad hoc committees. And the composition of those committees were, I had requested input from, everyone previously, and, and I know that, we're gonna probably have a facilities ad hoc committee at some point, to address, the facility usage fees, I should say.
Yeah.
So,
Dr.
So,
Krebs, did you see the second sentence in 2?
well, again. Yeah, so my question is it may or does? Because the comment is the board
I'm good. thanks.
The
Well,
board
actually,
may
maybe some
delegate
flexibility.
authority.
Right, either do it as a consensus or have the president do it. I think that it gives you the flexibility to do it either way.
small,
Okay,
Okay,
I was on a roll reading.
Is that-
I was on a roll reading these.
Yeah, you were.
See, I was nervous as all these lawyers are reading them. It's like I had to read carefully.
So 2506 is everyone okay with those
Yes.
changes that match our current practice?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Oh, man.
Now we're to the 5,000s, which are on page 13, bottom of 12, but really on page 13 of the checklist. So 5101, checking Dr. Cook, see if I don't want to miss any of your questions.
I know.
5101,
Yes, I had examples.
optional provision, the board must decide whether to specifically state that hate speech is prohibited and provide specific examples of hate speech. The option there, constitute hate speech, we would just choose to select or not select that specific option.
So we'd had that, we had added Confederate flag when we had that issue with the student.
Mhm.
So then, not limited to swastikas or, I mean,
I support putting the optional language in the policy.
I do. Is that enough? I guess, is there,
I think it is,
Okay.
because lists that get too long
that's,
run the risk that you've given the impression that you have an exhausted list,
Okay.
even though you've said, but not limited to. I think this is
okay.
appropriately short.
I agree.
Well, the other thing too is, the more detailed you get with examples, you also run the risk of potentially inviting a lawsuit on First Amendment grounds that,
Okay.
right, unless it's thoroughly vetted by the lawyers and they say, yeah, you're you're on safe grounds if you identify this.
Yeah.
So,
Everyone okay, 5101?
Mhm.
Okay. 5102 really isn't anything to choose there, just as a checklist that policy
I-
must be included in the student handbooks for.
So then my question here was, is this, and I guess I didn't put these comments in here, but this is this in the handbooks? Is this information in the handbooks?
I believe that it is. I don't know. I mean, I know I've seen it.
Okay.
But what I do know is there are several of these things, now that we adopt these policies, we will, over this year, make sure that all of
And
these
can
are
we put these
reflected.
in the handbooks, even though they've already been printed for this year?
They weren't going to they weren't going to hand out physical
Yeah,
copies
they
of the
didn't,
handbook.
in their planners, they didn't have the handbook, so the handbook is a digital version, certainly.
Add to it as.
And the
those will
students
be
have to
added
acknowledge it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it'll be a process, because there's lots of, some of the other
Right,
things we
there's
have to
some
check through, but yes. These will be, once we adopt these, the process will begin to start to put these in handbooks, and then ultimately, that'll be part of what is reviewed, next spring when you guys formally approve the handbooks again, as you always do. So 5104.
So I had a question on 5103.
Yep.
This was just
Oh, you did,
when
yes.
you're talking about students or school officials may search a student,
Yes,
and this is the student and their personal property as opposed to their lockers. So we're
Yes.
saying the
yes,
lockers are school property.
correct.
Now we're saying the student in their backpack kind of
Correct.
thing. Okay.
Yep.
It's just my clarification. Okay.
Age of majority. So this here, the E and F options would be options that are optional. Wait a minute. Yeah, not to have the E and F as options under that age of majority policy.
Is that consistent with what we do today?
Yes. Obviously, this is a questionable issue, so you don't see it publicized a lot in high schools, but ultimately this follows the law. So if it were ever, we would have to follow this anyway. E and F are options that we don't necessarily have to do.
Okay.
But I think it's definitely important to have the other ones in there, especially about
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
parent guardian notification.
Yeah.
when that occurs. Doesn't occur very often, but you do. Usually, in my experience as a high school principal, kid wants to do it because they want to sign themselves in and out. And once they realize parents know they requested it, and it goes away.
Yeah.
So. Everyone okay on 5104?
5106 is optional. We'll
Yep.
Table that till another time.
Okay.
5201 would be, include the optional notification language. Not current policy, but a good practice is the, what I
So
have in there.
the one question I had is,
Mhm.
had to do with if the parents can't be notified. Let me see, I'm opening it up.
Okay.
Make sure my notes match where I'm catching up to what I'm opening. 5201, okay. It's slowly opening, it's not opening, I don't know why. 5201, let's see. Loading. Okay, so what does it say? The building principal will promptly notify, what, was there a question in
We'll
C?
take immediate steps to notify the students' parents for taking into custody in E.
Mine isn't opening now.
It's the last paragraph in E.
When a law enforcement.
Is that what you're talking about, or are you looking at
I
something
said
else?
C, if a parent cannot be notified, what's the results?
School-related criminality?
Yeah. Must, no. Okay, so the paragraph, the last paragraph on this page, the building principal makes reasonable attempts to contact a parent, guardian, if the student. Go on.
But I'm a little confused by the way that paragraph is written, because it makes it sound like you're only contacting parents if the student is 18. Right? Because it says, if the student is
I had a
18 or emancipated, the building principal will make reasonable attempts to contact the student's parent guardian. If requested by the student, if the parent or guardian can't be reached, it doesn't answer what we do for the majority of our students who are less than
That
18.
was, yeah, my question. That wasn't clear. I thought that paragraph was unclear.
Okay, so when I read this, the building principal or designee will make reasonable attempts to contact the student's parent guardian before the student is questioned for law enforcement.
Mhm.
It says,
They're 18.
Okay.
if they're emancipated, then
They're gonna
it's
try
only
to-
requested by
they're
the
gonna
student.
Try to do that.
Gotcha.
The student has no rights.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's everything
Correct.
else.
Okay.
Is there somebody for the student, like a student advocate, if,
The building principal or designee has to be present at the end of that, in the top of the next page.
Building
It
principal
outlines that a
will be
district,
present for questioning.
and it's usually principal or assistant principal, that would be in.
and they're in the role of kind of
Correct.
Well, but they're not, this policy doesn't make the building principal responsible for protecting the interests of the student.
No, it's just that they're in there as a person that could attest to the questioning.
should we, I mean?
No.
We don't need one?
No.
Okay.
But the law enforcement agent is going to expect that a parent is there for somebody under 18, right? Or you would know better than I would. Yeah.
Yes, if they're gonna question them, otherwise they would have to, in my understanding, they would have to actually physically arrest them and take them down and do what they want to do outside of our district property if they wanted to
So they
question
couldn't
them.
question them without, they couldn't question.
And
Right.
even then, there are rules
Certainly not
about
in-
what they
certainly
can
not
do
in our-
without
In our
parental notification.
custody, yeah.
So is that policy, is that the way it, what's that stating? And this is like way out of my league, right?
This is definitely consistent with
Okay.
other practices and policies that I work with.
Okay.
And does it have in the schools where we have deputized presence? Obviously, not every district has, the presence that we have in all of our buildings regarding security, liaisons. So is there any On this issue, has there been any interaction with Officer Bell or to get their feedback on what may or may not be appropriate? I'm wondering, this, obviously, most districts don't have the degree, of security or liaisons that we do. Does the fact that we have those individuals in all of our buildings change anything with respect to what we should consider in a policy?
I think the concept of reasonable attempts is fair enough. I don't know if Officer Bell or Deputy Schuster weighed in on this. I guess you could have take a glance at that.
Yeah, we could have to take a glance, but
Yeah, I think it would be good just to have them take a look and,
I think keeping it somewhat flexible, I think is good, it's within reason, reasonable attempts. Especially when you're talking about older students, if there's a safety situation.
Right.
We may not be able to wait a long time for dealing with some imminent threat or something like that. We wouldn't want to tie their hands.
well, I mean, what if they might have a policy, like the Brandon Police
They
Department?
certainly do, yeah.
Pardon me?
I'm sure they do.
Well, that's what I mean, yeah, right, I mean, I'm sure they have, so we obviously want to have some consistency with, the policies and not have a potential conflict. But as far as the optional language, I'm fine with the optional language. Yeah.
Or the sheriff's department.
Pardon me?
Or the sheriff's.
Or the sheriff's department, right, exactly.
Good on that one?
Yeah, and I suppose it's important to keep in mind that this is specific to law enforcement.
Right.
So it does
Yes.
not include the security guards that we are hiring.
Correct.
okay. Excuse me, 5202.
Got a couple questions here.
Yeah,
So, so it's talking about Title IX, sexual harassment, but is it all harassment?
yes, this deals with all harassment, but actually directs specifically,
Student to student, staff to
Right.
student?
right, all of it. And then specifically though in the policy, if it's specifically Title IX sexual harassment, it directs them to the grievance policy that would be 3118.
And this is only for harassment that happens on school property or school,
Only within the school district jurisdiction.
within the school.
yes.
So if there's harassment and then if it kind of bleeds into the school, then it would be involved in the school. So like if there was online kind of harassment or
Yeah.
something in another activity that the students are involved in.
Right, districts are kind of limited into where their jurisdiction is, but if anytime you can, certainly tie it to that it's potentially going to create a disruption for the educational environment of the student or students, then districts have a little bit more ability to address that from a school discipline standpoint, yes, but not any and
But
everything.
so if something happens at school based on a non-school event, then that's when the school could take action
For sure.
if it
And
happens at
if it's
school.
outside, but has the ability or directly disrupts the learning environment of the school, then you would have ability to address that as well.
Okay. And then I had a question about the handbooks, but I think that's already been addressed. So that's kind of the question about the handbooks are going to be addressed after all this stuff goes through.
Yes. Yep, we'll make sure that the handbooks reflect all of these updates and changes. So we have 5202F there, select 5 school days. Is everyone okay with that optional language?
Is that what we had? I know.
Yeah, this is, yes, it gives us the most amount of time to be able to respond appropriately. And then that would be select 20 days in M, just to, in case their investigation or things require additional time and are lengthy, yes.
Are the days, are they busy, school days? So like if it's over break?
School days, yep, absolutely.
So if the complaint is filed the last day of school, you've got all summer?
You could technically, yes. I don't know that we would choose to do that. But it also, people, not coming into school may make it difficult to do the investigation. So when they're back in school, that's when that counts. I believe that's why that provision is in there specifically for school days in that situation.
How does that compare to what we have in our policy today? Because I don't think we picked specific days, but I don't remember.
I know in the Title IX regulations, there's specific timelines that were chosen in that grievance process. But I don't know specifically about if there's, what the date range was selected in the general harassment and investigation practice.
We might have to come back to that one because I want to look through how that compares to what we have today a little bit more closely.
Okay. And I believe that's 5517 would be our current policy. That would be comparable to that one.
I'm sorry, what was the number?
5517.
Oh, okay.
Our current number, the Neola policy is 5517 or
Yeah,
the 5517 here?
5517
is our
in
current
Neola.
legal policy that would be comparable to this policy. That's on the spread, on the sheet there, those numbers in red.
Got
As best I can do, I linked those for
I
reference
know what those
purposes.
mean. Took me a while.
So can we still go back on the, log in on the
Yes,
district website and look at the,
Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, those are still in place and still what we follow until there's a formal motion to pull the other ones off and put these in place, yes. Yep.
The 5517, you want to just look at it right now so we can get it done?
I've got it up right now. So what we have there right now, let's see.
You're looking for the days?
Yeah, I see in the reports and complaints of harassing conduct section, that first paragraph talks
Investigate
about
investigation.
teachers having to report it to the compliance officer within 2 days. There's a definition of days that says it's business days, not school days. But that doesn't,
Investigation will complete in a timely manner, ordinarily 15 business days. Individuals should make every effort to file a complaint within 30 days. So I think it says, completed at a time of ordinarily 15 business days of complaint being
Right.
received is what it currently is then, right?
right.
Business days are not school days, or are they school days?
They
Business.
are
Most,
not, they are
but-
business days,
Okay, Monday through Fridays.
except for holidays. Yeah.
I thought because I thought we talked about that in the policy committee before when there were some new regulations that came through with Title IX.
Yeah, true. The recommendation that I received from them is just to, if you're comfortable, give yourself as much time just in case you don't want to limit yourself if it is a complex investigation.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's reasonable. My only concern is specifying school days instead of business days or something else. And I can see the challenge of trying to investigate something that happened at school when there's nobody in the building anymore. But I don't know that investigation becomes easier if you wait from June to August. So I guess the question becomes, from a policy standpoint, do we need to commit ourselves at the policy level to moving by business days rather than by school days, or not?
I feel like the summer break is different than like the winter break. Like, it feels like over the holiday, people are gone. But in
Yeah.
the summer, you've got, and it's, you don't have 3 months until people come back.
True, but I mean, if you think about that, like if you have a difficult student situation and you've got time where there's nobody in the building, where you could be concluding your investigation, figuring out what your plan is for how you handle the effects on the student's education and their educational environment, so you have them in place by the time everybody walks back into the building. That is a much better student outcome than waiting until kids are back in classrooms again to initiate the investigation, which isn't to say that I think that our administration would wait as much as I'm thinking from a policy perspective. Is it important that we say we are committed to doing this within business days so that we are addressing this in a more timely manner than we would if we went by school days in all situations?
Or alternatively, you could say that it would be completed within 5 school days, or you could even say 20 business days, whichever is shorter. So then if you're in school, then the 5 school days would apply. But if it was at the end of the school year, to accommodate the difficulty, you'd have a month to be able to contact people, and so the
That's
whichever
fair.
shorter language would then cover, I think, maybe both concerns.
That's a good
Well, I
compromise.
think the other thing to, maybe remember too, is that the administrators and people who are doing the investigations would be on break too during the business days over the winter holiday. And so that's probably why the school days is there to, their availability obviously in the summer is extended, but they have the same breaks, same spring break, same, winter breaks as the students were. So they're not there over those breaks to be able to do that investigation.
Right.
So that could be conflicting because those are business days, but they're not actually here because they're not school days to do the investigation.
I think the current language says business days. So if you switched it from school days to business days, that might resolve it. And then I think it would be incumbent upon us, I think if we did the 20 business days, then if that person's not available, then we'd have to figure out who could do that investigation, gather that information.
Mhm.
Just speaking out loud, because I think that would be, if something happened, let's say it was on the last day of school or somewhere in that range, or we received a complaint, the idea that it would be, months later, we wouldn't do that, but, policy-wise, it would allow that.
20 business days would be a month.
20 business days.
Right.
20 school days would be
Right.
3 months.
But even if it was like over spring break, when spring break is a week or 10, whatever, a couple.
But those wouldn't necessarily be business days. The district's closed.
Well, I mean, if you're doing whichever is shorter, if it's 5 school days or even just keep it at 15 business days, whichever is shorter. If it's the day before spring break, your 5 school days is going to kick in. You're going to hit that before you get to the business days.
Yep.
The business days really only would of the being the shorter would only apply really the Christmas break and in the summer. I mean, as a practical matter, the only time where that would end up being the shorter duration of period or time.
Yeah.
Language you can adjust a little bit.
Sure.
Okay.
That's the.
I like that compromise.
So Roger's compromise there? I
Yes,
think that's
very much.
Very logical.
Roger, say that again, so I have that.
So it would say, if we're going with 5, we would say that it would be completed within 5 days, within 5
5
school
school days.
days or 15 business days, whichever is shorter.
Okay. And then what about M?
So the one that says 20 school days, so 20 school days or,
Or
20 business days. Whichever shorter. Whichever
well,
shorter.
what do you think? 20 business days is usually going to be a month to a month and a half,
20 business days. No.
or 20 school days is
Well,
going to
they're gonna be
be
the same during the school year,
during the school year.
aside from
During the school day, but it just gives you the summertime.
So
Well, so for that one, do we even need to say 20, just say 20 business days?
yeah.
Just do 20 business days.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. 5206A, I think, is the next one that has optional
I
language.
had a question about 5206.
Okay,
Lost it
let me
again.
get there.
The restore E.
Okay,
What was E about? Was E about restorative practice? So my question was there a restorative practice for sexual harassment? That was kind of, how is this tied to a victim? I was kind of wondering. An E, that's what my notes are saying. I'm trying to remember what I was thinking. So the restorative practice before suspending or expelling a student. So I guess I was a little concerned when you're talking about the victim offender conference. I know that must not, when there was a sexual assault harassment kind of issue. I'm
right,
concerned.
that would be, right, that this wouldn't be, that would be.
That's a title, is that
that would
Title
be
IX? So
in
that's
Title
not
IX
any of this stuff.
regulations, More,
Okay.
more.
Yeah.
Involved in probably the informal resolution process if that was agreed upon.
Okay.
But this isn't applying to Title IX
Okay.
grievance process.
Victim doesn't have to be. with
That's
the
correct. They
perpetrator,
don't
Okay.
have to, no.
ever.
Making sure.
Yep,
Yeah, it's just good practice, but very much backed up with law too.
Okay.
so 5206A, right, is that where we,
Yes.
okay?
My question for this one was, are appeal hearings, are all appeal hearings part of the full board? Can any of these be a subcommittee? What about protecting the victims again?
We asked those questions of Neola, didn't we?
That's what I thought. Yeah.
We had a lot of conversation.
And I
about that.
thought, for some of these, I thought like maybe, and again, maybe this is Title IX, the only people that could be on like a Title IX appeal were the ones who'd been through the Title IX training.
This is correct.
So then, but this one's not Title IX, but
This is-
this is not, but I think it had to do with the, if the appeal was going to the whole board, because right now it doesn't, correct?
For Title IX,
No, for whatever 5206A is. The student discipline, it's not the whole board, is it? But I thought, does it,
I don't believe we have current
We don't
practice that there's an appeal to the board.
does it say that there is? Maybe I thought there were.
Talked about it. We talked about it.
I know that we did in the Title IX and the harassment context. I don't know that we talked about it in the full student discipline context. We did talk about, I do think it was in the Title IX context where we were talking about having appeals to essentially a subcommittee of the board instead of the full board. But I can't recall what language we ended up adopting there.
At the
And
end
gone
of
through the
here,
Title IX
in
policies,
C, I see the line of a majority of the board finds a preponderance of the evidence that the student committed misconduct. So this was telling me that this was the whole board, kind of. But I don't think we currently have a whole board present for the appeals.
I think the difference is that we don't have appeals to the board right now.
We have appeals for discipline, or what is it that,
Not for discipline. Discipline, there's the committee level, which includes a board member, and then it's
Okay.
appealed to the superintendent today. I think at least Dr. Outlaw or Mr. Scaling is that it's the committee makes the decision and then it can be appealed to the superintendent and that's the end of the road.
I think that, yeah, the committee is the
Committee is the final
committee's
decision.
the end of the road currently.
Mm.
Yep.
Correct. I mean,
but now we're saying that it can appeal to the board? Are we
So
saying?
that's the optional text, so
This whole part C, is it the whole thing optional?
I don't know.
At the end of C, it's,
You're looking at 5206A,
yes,
is it at the end of B?
no, at the end of C. It's the parent, guardian, and student may be represented at their cost by an attorney. Then the board will not suspend or expel the student unless following the hearing, a majority of the board finds a preponderance of evidence that the student committed misconduct. So
Yeah, we don't do that today.
That's,
Correct.
So that needs to get fixed.
So if this is currently how the truant policy is, but it states in the beginning, if we want to do something different, we would want to make sure, which is what our practice is to have the committee, of a board member and other representatives have that hearing, make that decision as final. We would need to add that language in this policy that would supersede section C.
Okay.
So,
so this is something that we need to discuss. So
With Troon, if
Well,
we
I
want to.
Desire to
thank you.
continue with the same practice that we currently have. So if so, then they just need to align.
Right.
The language to fit.
I would need to align that language with
With
this
the appeal.
policy.
And have it reviewed by Troon to make sure that there are no issues with our current practices.
Correct. We would double check that, yep.
So you
Yeah, I'm
check
fine
on
with that.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I just have a question in 5206B. They're talking about an example, what's an example of a manifestation of disability?
So let's say that I was emotionally impaired.
Okay.
And I had an outburst that was consistent with the disability that was designated, then that would be a manifestation of a disability that was documented in.
Okay, thank you.
We're in 5206C.
Optional language there. The selection of the policy includes a provision providing that if the board denies a student reinstatement petition, the parent may not refile another petition within 180 days after that denial.
Is that our current practice, or we don't have that?
I don't know the answer to that question, but that's definitely what was recommended, so they can't keep
You're right, no, I
Doing
get
it.
that.
over and over again trying to change the decision. That's a common practice to
Okay.
have that in there, yes.
That seems reasonable.
Okay.
All right. 5206D.
Roger, you're still looking at a 9 o'clock, put the place marker in there and then.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
it's good plan. I mean,
That would
we're,
be great.
wherever we are at a
And
point
then
where it's
come
a
back on
break.
Wednesday and pick up wherever, so maybe like another
Thursday.
1 or 2 max.
You don't want to just.
See you next Wednesday.
Do
I'm so-
it all nighter here?
Yes, order pizza? All right,
I can submit it for reimbursement. I'm kidding.
It's limited
kidding.
by,
Yeah, right?
we have 4 of us to vote on it.
5206D speaks to enrollment following misconduct in another public school or non-public school. This is an optional policy, but our current policy has language that allows us to do this if it serves the best interest of the district.
Okay.
Okay. So I think next one, 5207.
E,
With the-
It's
we're just
it's
including it.
A checklist to make sure we're in compliance, and we'll be in compliance, yep. Oops. Skipped 5207 has a few parts here.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So before adopting this policy, you must hold a public hearing about the policy.
Mhm.
What's the purpose of that?
Very similar to the public hearings that
The budget.
Mr. Engler has
Okay.
to do, opportunity to have public participation and input.
Okay.
So anytime you adjust this specific bullying policy.
Is that just tied to a bullying?
It's specifically just tied to that policy. So, and since we're adopting a new bullying policy, we have to do the formal process of the public hearing, and we would just do it at the same time as the formal adoption process. So that need to check on that was my note, ensuring that that was the same intention, so
Right.
I could have taken that out. sorry.
And the public hearing comments are limited just to that. They're not, it's not like open to all the policies. It's
Correct, it would just be to 50,
At the
just to that
public
policy,
hearing.
because it's a public hearing for that policy. We provide that opportunity, and then we move on with the rest of the agenda. 5207F, we have to select that the superintendent is the responsible school official for this policy and responsible for ensuring the policy is properly implemented. Their recommendation is to select the superintendent. And they had a note in here that speaks to why that they recommend the superintendent be selected as that.
Any concerns with that?
So just for clarification, and I thought we had said this, there's like a line of succession, like if you're gone that day, that somebody else has that role?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, okay.
Yeah, I think it says, does it say designee also?
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so usually if, let's say I was out of the country or something like that, then.
Before you go, or you have it set up with it.
Designee, that type of thing, so.
5207G, that optional language isn't part of current policy practice.
I can see the value in adopting the sections on training and educational programs because we certainly see enough bullying incidents, and that is of enough concern in our district, like many others, and a significant concern for students these days. So the optional language on training and educational programs, I think, would demonstrate the board's commitment to ensuring that we have resources for students, staff, and parents. I think the task force creates some additional obligations in a specified structure that would tie our hands from addressing our district's needs in other ways. So I wouldn't want to take that first section of optional language, but the other two I think fit well with things that we are currently doing. So they would not be new obligations for our district, but including them in the policy would certainly assure the community that the board takes this seriously and that the administration is going to continue to keep those issues front and center.
So it's ensuring that like a safe schools bullying, is that annual or is that biannual?
It's optional.
It's optional.
It's
So
not-
this would be a change for us.
Correct.
So this is recommending that we have.
Annual
every year
training.
Annual.
Right.
Don't do other things that talk about bullying on an annual basis. I mean, as opposed to that specific module.
You know, there are, but it wouldn't be like an automatic, it's not like, it's not required. And then, I don't think we do it every single year,
Okay.
that kind of training.
Right.
And we have 5 days and, we'll let Title IX and, different things. And obviously the safe schools modules, that's where we do all the mandatory yearly ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be concerned about the requiring, I think everybody has to do it when they're hired.
Right, it's one of the ones that we
Everybody's
rotate
had
every
it.
few years that they go through. So they don't have it every year, but they have it initially upon hire, and then every couple of years, they're refreshed on it. So it's not annual, but it does occur.
What if it said periodic instead of annual?
Yeah.
That would meet with our current practice.
It would still, to Alicia's point, it would, make a statement that, this is something we very much value and so without locking in,
No.
Yeah.
the frequency.
Some update. I've tried to click.
I think
on it.
that's fair.
But We're.
And actually, I didn't even notice, but periodic is actually used in the
In the
second.
next one, yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't have the
I think
annual.
periodic sounds good. The annual is my only concern.
Yeah.
And the third paragraph does say periodically, it doesn't it?
Right.
So we could just add periodic instead of annual in the second one.
So let's choose the second one. but change the word to periodic.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
9 o'clock, you wanna wrap it or?
Well, how about we do one more because 5210 is optional, and then we're out of the 5200s. How about that?
Well, we got to do 5209 first, too.
Correct. So we got one more to do.
Yeah.
So we'll do
Two
I have
more.
a couple questions on a couple of the other, just a couple of the 5200s.
But we're coming back to the ones that don't have choices to be made, right?
Yeah, I think that was the idea, that we were gonna go through the ones that had choices and.
Okay, so I just want to bring up one, then we get to it then.
Okay, so 5209 then?
5209, is that the cell phones?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah.
Option 1 is our current practice and policy.
Students can use their phones in school, but under,
It doesn't completely outlaw, yes,
Yeah.
but within the rules established by the schools, yes. Everyone okay with that on 5209?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
5210 is optional policy for later discussion.
so what kind of GPS tracking, I mean, is this like, I didn't know what,
Yeah, that's relatively new, the GPS, like, some of, I guess,
like
Never seen it.
air tags? I'm thinking air tags, but that's just,
No.
that's not audio, that's
There would
not
be-
sound.
Your cell phone or your watch turned
could
on
be,
to listen.
more commonly, it's, people have a watch that have a GPS, so parents can track where their kids are, and sometimes those have the ability to record.
Okay,
Could that now include the cell phones? I think so. But basically, that's what that's in reference to. There's some specific devices that aren't cell phones that have GPS tracking on it.
so I mean, is it somebody
communication.
accessing the audio, like, can I access my child's audio on my phone? Can I enact their phone to
Some of those
record?
devices. have the
That's, so that's
ability
kind
to do
of
that.
part of the
Yes.
issue, that
Yes.
I can, from a distance,
Right.
activate the recording.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't, okay.
All right.
Okay, I just want to ask a question then. I just want to get this one asked, get it started, because 5213. 5213. That's about the PPOs. I guess I'm just questioning, like, what was my question here? I guess I'm just questioning the policy, like that if there's a PPO, a student has a PPO against another student, it doesn't sound like we're doing anything to support the student.
In this policy?
Yeah.
I believe it says we'll do as much as we possibly can. But like you couldn't, changing schedules, but removing someone from a class, like an elective class that they chose to take because of the PPO, you couldn't necessarily remove them from the opportunity to do that. But you do things like change their schedule so they don't interact as much, potentially change their lunches, basically accommodate as much as you can without removing the student from their ability to have a free and appropriate public education as well.
Okay, I guess I'd like to come back to that one then. I have some concerns there.
All right.
Okay,
So we will pick up
53.
what was that, 5301?
5301.
We reconvene. All right, good work. All right, thank you everyone for all of your time and attention this evening, and this committee meeting is adjourned. Yeah.
5211.
The,